Hello everyone, my name is Anton Pelcher. I'm an engineer and I've been constructing fish farms for more than 10 years. Today we're going to talk about incubation. What does this process presume? Why and when is it needed at a fish farm, and how to carry it out properly? Be sure to watch this video to the end, because you will get through understanding of fertilized eggs incubation process. Which way does it take place? What equipment is required in order to incubate different species of fish? Basically everything about the process of incubating eggs at a fish farm. So subscribe to my channel, press the like button, and here we go. And we will start with what the incubation is in general, probably from the very basics. For those who are not knowledgeable in the subject, incubation or hatching is the very first stage of the fish life cycle. At any fish farm you grow fish, either fry or grow out fish. Either way, it all starts with the fertilized eggs. Therefore, the incubation of eggs is the very first stage which fish farming starts with. I will say right away that not each and every fish farm has its own incubation. As in general, there are specialized hatcheries. I will explain why. Because some farms, and I would say not even some, but a large number of farms, start farming grow-out fish from the stage of fry, which is stocking material at such farms. It doesn't mean that the fry is obtained from now here. It's still incubated and ungrown by some farmer. That's why there are separate farms, hatcheries, where fertilized eggs are incubated, ungrown to larva stage, and then to fry. As well as there are separate farms where grow-out fish are grown from fry. It also often happens that a farm, usually a large industrial-scale one, combines all the processes. It has its own hatchery and its own department for farming grow-out fish, and sometimes it also has its own broodstock. Thus, in fact, it's a full-cycle farm. It's completely autonomous by getting its own stocking material. There are actually farms like that. What is incubated? It's probably obvious to everyone that fertilized eggs are incubated. But where do the eggs come from? In fact, fertilized eggs are obtained from the so-called broodstock. Broodstock presumes fertilized eggs producers, females and males. Eggs are taken from females in one way or another. Then they are mixed with the milk of the males, and then the eggs are put into special incubators and are incubated. Basically, this is the beginning of the process. So, where do farmers usually get fertilized eggs from? Either they have their own broodstock, and they get fertilized eggs from the broodstock, or they buy them from outside. I mean, that you can just as easily buy eggs from a farm that specializes in obtaining them. A farm that holds a large broodstock, and they get their eggs, they sell those eggs, as well as the fry, to outside buyers. As a rule, small farms prefer to work with fry stocking material, because the incubation process is quite a complicated story, and especially complicated is the maintenance of the broodstock. That's why small farms are usually stocked with fry, which they buy from third-party fry farms. Slightly larger ones, which in their turn buy eggs and incubate them in order to reduce costs and improve quality. And the third category of farms are those that fully maintain their own broodstock. Of course, the presence of a hatchery, and even more so own broodstock at different farms, also depends on the type of fish. For some fish species, obtaining their own eggs and keeping own broodstock is a fairly simple process. For example, I could refer to African catfish, tilapia, crayfish, shrimp. Mostly not fish, but rather hydrobionts are also attributed here. So it makes sense to keep your own broodstock when farming these hydrobionts. There are fish species when growing which it's also reasonable and profitable to keep a broodstock in large volumes, for example, sturgeon. Also the same as for trout. For trout, I would say that it's 50-50, because as a rule, the majority of farms, even those that have their own hatchery, buy fertilized eggs from abroad. At least it's so in my country. I'll explain why. Because fertilized eggs brought from abroad are relatively inexpensive and at the same time have a very high quality. Those farms that sell eggs have been working with selection for a long time, and therefore the growth indicators of such eggs will often be better than ones that you get on your own from your own broodstock. That's why it's least expedient to keep your broodstock when growing trout and salmon. For sturgeons, it's kind of average, and the most appropriate for having own broodstock are African catfish, tilapia, crayfish and shrimp. Well, I'm now talking about those fish species that are classically grown in RAS in Russia and CIS countries. Let's talk about how often and when fertilized eggs are bought and delivered to the farm. Let's imagine that you buy the eggs from some third-party supplier. So, eggs can be purchased once a year if you need to get fish only in the spring, for example fry, and release the fry into lakes or rivers, for example under Bioresources Compensation Program, or you can sell it to the owners of the open water bodies, for ponds or cages. Or fertilized eggs can be purchased several times, and this way you make several cycles, several generations per year. As a rule, fertilized eggs are delivered quite simply. They're placed in the water saturated with oxygen, so-called oxygen bags. And then the bags are placed in a special isothermal container on the ice. Inside this container, it's constantly cool, and the water is saturated with oxygen. And thus, in cold water saturated with oxygen, fertilized eggs feel as good as possible and can be transported for as long as possible. When a supply is located nearby, fertilized eggs can be delivered by car, even a simple passenger car, because eggs don't take much space. They can be transported even in a car trunk, or they are delivered by airplane, which in general is more expensive. If you need to deliver the eggs from some faraway country or region, of course, they're transported by airplane. When the eggs arrive, the container is opened, oxygen bags with eggs are taken out, and they are gradually transferred into incubators. Thus, the bags are opened, the eggs are gradually and slowly adapted to the temperature, and then transferred to incubators, and the incubation stage starts. How are eggs incubated? Of course, eggs of different fish species have different incubation conditions. Different temperature regimes, different equipment is needed. We will talk about it further. But nevertheless, the principle is all the same. In order for the eggs to incubate and to get larvae with maximum survival rate, you need to constantly supply water saturated with oxygen. You need to ensure that the eggs are permanently provided with oxygen. You also need to ensure that the eggs are stirred so that they don't stick to each other, that they don't get diseased, and so on. You need to supply them with proper quality water. Thus, you need to make sure that the water meets certain criteria. In addition to water oxygenation, water should not contain excessive gases. It must be disinfected. It should not contain any harmful, undesirable substances. Excessive iron, water hardness, and so on, because it's very destructive to fertilized eggs. And probably the last thing, you need to maintain the correct temperature in the incubation block. Which exactly? Of course, it depends on the fish. We will talk about that a little later. So we proceed to the incubation temperature needed for different species of fish. As a rule, trout are incubated at 7 to 9 degrees, and at hatching the temperature rises to 12 degrees. Sturgeons are incubated at between 13 and 18 degrees, depending on the species of sturgeon, because there are many, and each of them needs different temperature conditions. Tropical species such as African catfish, tilapia, Australian crayfish, shrimp are incubated well beyond 20 degrees. That is, the incubation of some species takes place at the temperature from 24 degrees and beyond up to 30 degrees. And whitefish, for example, is an interesting type of fish. The incubation temperature for whitefish is from 0 to 1 degree. Thus, you need to maintain a constant temperature around 0 degrees during incubation of whitefish eggs, and then the temperature needs to be increased before hatching. Imagine the duration of incubation at this temperature takes 6 months. That is, you need to maintain a temperature close to 0 for 6 months. Why? Because these fish have lived under these natural conditions for thousands of years. They're like this. For example, they lived in the northern part of Siberia, where winter is very long, and just in the winter period the eggs were incubated. So that's basically it. Usually whitefish eggs are laid in the autumn, and incubation takes place only in the spring. In fact, it takes half a year. Generally, the incubation cycle can be corrected, adjusted in the systems with temperature control, but nevertheless it's a separate story. So, what types of incubators are needed for different species of fish? Let's start with trout. For trout, there are two options of incubators. Either they are vertical, for instance, American-type ones, which have vertically arranged shelves one above another. Water is fed to the top of the incubator and gradually passes through each shelf and cascades downward, being oxygenated in parallel. Thus, the same volume of water is used from 8 to 16 times, depending on the number of shelves. So, this incubator type is a fairly compact one. Its disadvantage is that you cannot constantly, without opening, without taking out a shelf, see how the eggs feel, how the hatching is going. The incubation is a little difficult in terms of visual observation. There are also tray incubators. They take up more space, consume more water. Such an incubator is a tray with special frames that are placed inside. Frames similar to those that are used in vertical incubators, but they're stacked in a horizontal open tray. The trays can be arranged one above the other. Such type of incubators takes up more space, consumes more water, but many farmers prefer them because it's easier and simpler to control the process and check the eggs. The next species is sturgeon. As a rule, sturgeons are best incubated in hatching apparatuses called sturgeon. This is just the name of this incubator. It was invented in the former Soviet Union and is very well adapted for sturgeon caviar hatching. It consists of 2 boxes, one inside the other, and an upper bucket. The bucket has an irregular shape. Water is poured into it, and when a certain volume is reached, meaning that the water reaches the top, the water pours out sharply. The water falls into the main bottom box, inside which there is another one with a mesh. When the water gets to the bucket, the eggs rise. The eggs are stirred up and then gets back on the mesh. In this way, the eggs are not stuck together and the larva yield is maximized. The next species of fish is African catfish. African catfish is well incubated in 2 types of incubators. Either it's a vase incubator. By the way, the vase incubator is a very universal incubator where you can basically incubate almost any type of fish. I'm talking about fish now. I'm not mentioning crayfish and shrimp, as it's a separate story. African catfish eggs are incubated very well in this type of incubator, because it's well adapted for incubating small eggs. But in fact, sturgeon and trout are also incubated in vase. What is a vase incubator? It's actually a flask with a cone bottom. The water is fed from the bottom of the cone. It raises the eggs and keeps them suspended. On top is a mesh to keep the eggs from escaping the incubator, and water drain is provided for. That's basically it. That is the main function of vase incubator, to constantly keep the eggs in suspension, and the low cone bottom provides a change in the speed of upward water flow so that the eggs are maintained in the optimum condition and lay exactly in the place which is comfortable for their incubation. But in fact, any kind of eggs can be incubated in the vase incubator. The second alternative is a tray-type incubator. As I have already mentioned, such incubators are good for trout, for salmonids, and they're also very good for incubating African catfish. So the eggs of these fish types are incubated in tray hatcheries. Tilapia. Tilapia is quite peculiar in terms of incubation. No incubators are needed for tilapia hatching. You will need just separate tanks or reservoirs. They can be elongated, rectangular ones. They can be round. Tilapia nurtures fertilized eggs in the mouth, so we just put females together with males in a certain proportion in a separate tank. For example, a rectangular one. The fish lay eggs there, put them in their mouths, and they nurture them. That's why tilapia is so peculiar. No special incubation equipment is needed, but you will surely need a lot of small tanks. Some keep tilapia in aquariums. That's also quite a common option. They use large racks with many individual small tanks, actually aquariums. Australian crayfish and shrimp. Separate reservoirs are enough for their incubation as well. Racks with small reservoirs, where the females and males are also transferred, where spawning also occurs, and further the eggs are separated for incubation. Whitefish. Whitefish fertilized eggs are also very small, in fact, the same as those of African catfish, so they're perfectly hatched in the vase incubator. Therefore, as a rule, in 90% of cases, any whitefish are incubated in the vase. I'm not going to talk about how many eggs can be placed in each incubator and what an incubator water consumption parameters are, because all this information can be found in the bonus file, which I will mention a little later. And now let's talk about the equipment that is required for the incubation department. Why do you need equipment? In order to incubate eggs of this or that fish species, you need to create the right conditions that I've talked about earlier, namely the right water parameters and the correct flow rate. Let's imagine you need to incubate trout eggs, for example. You have a borehole, and you will need to somehow ensure that you are supplying the water of proper quality to the incubation department. Now, what do you need? To start with, you need a pumping station in case you feed water from a borehole. At least you need to supply the water to the incubation block. Next, the second is to remove excessive gases. As a rule, any water body contains various gases which are undesirable in RAS, such as nitrogen. The water can be oversaturated with nitrogen, and this can lead to gas bubble disease. In general, unnecessary gases always have bad influence on the growth and development of fish, including fertilized eggs. Therefore, a special degassing unit is used for blowing off excess gases, as well as saturating water with oxygen. Water disinfection. If there is any risk of pathogens getting into the water, for example, if you use water from any open water source, you should definitely disinfect water. If you take clean underground water from a great depth, then probably disinfection is not necessary, because the probability of pathogens getting into the incubation department is minimal. Temperature correction. It's not always the case that the source water meets the requirements for incubation of a particular fish species, so a temperature correction unit is often required. What is the temperature correction unit? Usually it's a tank, inside which there is either a heat exchanger of some kind, which heats the water, or a cooler, a chiller. And by the way, the degasser is placed after heating or cooling water unit, because when water is heated, the pressure of dissolved gases increases, and just after heating you need to degas water. And of course, there are situations when the overall quality of water from a certain water source doesn't meet the requirements for incubation. For instance, the water contains a lot of iron, or the water is hard, or it contains some other pollutants and suspended substances. In this case, you need to install a water treatment system. I will not dwell on this issue now, because I have a separate video dedicated on this topic, which you can watch following the pop-up link. If you need to understand in detail how water is treated before it's delivered to the fish farm, watch this video. And now we continue. Let's talk about what water supply schemes are used for incubation departments. Basically, there are two of them. It's either direct flow water supply or recirculating water supply. What is direct flow? For example, you have a borehole in an incubation department. You supply water from the borehole, prepare the water, and feed it to the incubation department and then discharge it into the sewage. And this amount of water is irretrievably gone. What are the advantages of such a system? Well, firstly, the water can't contain products of fish vital activity, such as ammonia, carbon dioxide, and so on. Suspended solids can't be contained in the water a priori, especially if you take water from a borehole. So you don't need to treat water from fish vital activity products. And this simplifies the task, increases reliability, and generally makes the system simply cheaper. What are the downsides? The disadvantages are that the direct flow water supply of hatcheries requires many times more clean, fresh makeup water than a recirculating system, where the water is constantly recirculated and treated. It happens that the water in the water source is either too different in temperature. For example, in a water source, it's temperature in 2 degrees, and you need to make it 28 degrees. That's a huge waste of heat that you constantly need to spend on water heating. And then you need to discharge this water from the system. Of course, there are heat recuperating systems, but they don't keep all the heat in the system. They have their efficiency level. So sometimes it's more appropriate to use a recirculating system to save this heat. And secondly, the water source itself is not always able to provide the required amount of water. Thus, you can have a huge incubation department and a borehole with low debit, which is only a little bit of water. In this case, you will also need to use a recirculating system option. So, let's talk about the recirculating scheme. What is it? In fact, it's the same system, but including water treatments, filters, and recirculation. You don't discharge the water from the incubation block into the sewage system. As a rule, filters presume a mechanical water treatment filter and possibly a biological water treatment filter. Although, if during incubation of the eggs the amount of ammonium nitrogen is minimal, there are also disinfection, oxygenation, pumps. Such a system can be individual per incubation unit, a recirculating or RAS system, or it could be a combined system. For example, it may be combined with the larval block. But one common system usually works only when you don't have to keep different generations of fish in the systems. I am a proponent of keeping only one generation of fish if you have a combined system. So you incubate fertilized eggs, transfer to a larval department, and then when the larva is transferred further, you can lay new eggs into the incubators. For large-scale farms, where you need a constant flow, this is not very suitable, of course. Therefore, for large farms, where it's necessary to reincubate, transfer the larva and immediately lay new eggs, and this is a constant and continuous process where there are no empty tanks, I highly recommend the incubation department based on RAS technology. And the larval block should be independent. And now a special bonus for my subscribers. Following the link in the description, you can download a special file in which I reveal the main aspects of the incubation of each type of fish. These are the bare figures. Type of fish, type of incubator, where this type of fish fertilized eggs are incubated, water consumption. And as soon as you insert the number of fertilized eggs that you need to incubate, you will get an accurate calculation of the number of hatching units that you will need for incubating the necessary amount of eggs of the particular fish type. So download the file following the link, press the like button, subscribe to my channel. It's Anton Pelcher and my channel on how to grow fish and make good money from it. Bye!